Hello, and welcome to I Know Dino, the Big Dinosaur Podcast, where we cover news, interviews, and discussions of all things dinosaur.
Hello and welcome to I Know Dino. I'm Garrett.
And I'm Sabrina.
And today we'll be talking about Leaellynasaura and a bunch of dinosaur news. As always, we want to give a big thank you to all of our patrons who've gone to patreon.com and pledged their support. If you're interested in supporting the podcast and you like what we're doing, please go to patreon.com/iknowdino and check out our video and the rewards that we offer. So jumping straight into the news, our first article is titled Mass Spectrometry and Antibody-Based Characterization of Blood Vessels from Brachylophosaurus canadensis.
Oof.
Yeah. So it was published in the Journal of Proteome Research, and it's behind a paywall, so I got a lot of this information from other sources that reported a little bit here and there. It was written by Timothy P. Cleland and others. And basically, because you might not have been able to tell from the title what they're talking about, in 2007, some researchers in Montana found a Brachylophosaurus, and they've been working on it since then. First, they recovered some soft tissue by demineralizing the bone. And we talked about demineralizing bone a little bit before, and I think they did it the same way here. And the way that we talked about before is basically you put the bone in acid and you dissolve the bone away, and then you're just left with some soft tissue afterwards. So when they got their soft tissue, they looked at it and they figured that it was probably a blood vessel. Actually, kind of like a little web of blood vessels. But they recognized that it could have been a few other things. One of those things was a biofilm. And basically what that would be is some other kind of organic material that coated internal parts of a bone. So they said it could have been like bacteria or a fungus or who knows what, because the bone is millions of years old. So anything could have happened to that bone in that period of time, or it could have even been part of the dinosaur that kind of decomposed and then redistributed within the bone. Kind of gross, but it was a possibility. So they wanted to prove that it was most likely a blood vessel. It was in the places where you'd expect to see a blood vessel, but you couldn't be sure if it was a real blood vessel or not. The structure was preserved well enough that they were able to conduct what's called peptide sequencing. And it's a lot like DNA sequencing if you think about you're taking a little piece of a protein and then you're figuring out just what that protein is and what it does and what the series of, in this case, peptides are. And that tells you what the exact protein is. So they talk about like genetic code. You're basically looking for the code of this soft tissue so that you can decide what it actually was when it was alive. Luckily, it was preserved well enough they could actually do this, which surprised everybody when this was first done on other materials a while ago. And the peptide sequence was consistent with some extant archosaurians. And that came from the abstract. I'm not sure exactly which species they chose, but you probably remember archosaurs are the common ancestor of living birds and crocodiles, and there isn't really anything else that's around right now that has that same lineage with dinosaurs, so it was, I'm sure, one or the other, or maybe both. So when they looked at it, they found that, yes, it did look like it was the same sequence, but they wanted to be sure, so they used another technique that was in the title as antibody-based characterization. And what that is you get some antibodies that are specific to the proteins that you think you have, and then you see if they attach to it. The typical analogy is antibodies are kind of like a key in a lock. So you make the key to fit the lock, or in this case, you guess at what the key needs to be to fit the lock, and then you see if it fits, and then you know if you have the right thing. Elena Schroeder, who was one of the authors on the paper, said, quote, "As we uncover more and more sequences from ancient specimens, we might be able to use the similarities and differences in those sequences to hypothesize about how closely related different species of extinct animals are," end quote. And I think that's really fascinating because right now we basically just guess based on whether they look the same and specifically whether their bones look alike. So it's nice to have a little bit of genetic information to work with, since that's how we do everything with living animals. We do it all based on whether they can mate and numbers of chromosomes and DNA and stuff like that. We don't pick up bones and see how much they look alike. So it would be cool to get some more information that way. Cleland also said that, quote, "We don't even know what kind of questions we can ask now," end quote. And I think that's a really good point because until recently, we didn't think that there would be any soft tissue that was preserved. Who knows what else could be in these fossils, and we'll have to look around and see. So I'm really excited to see what other stuff comes out in the future. Thanks to our listener Philip for emailing us this article. It was on the website 538, and it references 2 articles by Michael Benton, who has written about error rates in dinosaur species identification. So, according to the article, Benton estimates that 48% of dinosaurs named between 1850 and 1980 have been invalidated.
That's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot more than I thought would have been invalidated. And that's compared to 20% of living species that have been invalidated, which also seems super high. I guess they're not obvious things like someone tried to rename a dog. It's probably a lot of bacteria and things like that that are a lot harder to tell because all the low-hanging fruit for species has already been discovered. But it still seems like 20% is a lot when you have living species.
Mm-hmm.
The article I could get into the best, because it was in open access, is titled Fossil Quality and Naming Dinosaurs. It was published in Biology Letters back in 2008. So all the absolute numbers I'm about to say are definitely wrong because it's been 8 years. But the relative numbers should be about the same because it spans the period before 2008 all the way back to when dinosaurs were discovered. So Benton said, quote, "Of the 726 currently invalid dinosaurian species, 582, or 80.2%, were based on isolated teeth and bones, whereas 247 of the 675 currently valid dinosaur species, or about 36.6%, were based on such limited materials," end quote. So basically he's saying if you base a species on a single bone or tooth or whatever you can find, it probably has a higher chance of being invalidated later than if you can find more bones or more material about the dinosaur. And he also added that, quote, "As the use of incomplete specimens declines, past performance suggests that dinosaurian systematists ought to be establishing a higher proportion of valid species now than they did in the past," end quote. So apparently, paleontologists have figured out that it's not a great idea to name a species based on a single tooth or something like that. So it's not happening as much as it used to. In 2006, he also created a table of all the paleontologists who've named at least 10 dinosaur species. And at the time, there were 30 paleontologists, that is. Most of the contemporary paleontologists have a perfect or near perfect record because there hasn't been enough time for people to find more material or invalidate their findings for other reasons. And Benton does think that they'll have better records than previous fossil hunters, but not necessarily 100% or 90% like a lot of them are at right now. My favorite part about that list, though, is that he's got all 30 paleontologists who've discovered more than 10 dinosaur species. So Othniel Charles Marsh is on there, and so is Edward Drinker Cope. And Marsh named 80 species, and 23 are considered valid, according to that article, giving him a success rate of 28.8%. But on the other hand, Cope named only 64 species, so he didn't get as many overall, and he only had 9 that are still considered valid, so he only had a 14.1% success rate.
So Marsh won the Bone Wars?
Yeah, that's what it looks like. He discovered more overall, and he had more than twice as many are still considered valid. 9 is not that good. There are a lot of other paleontologists who found more than 9. There's probably a dozen of them. But not very many people have found 23. That's a huge number. Or 80, depending on which number you want to use.
Well, he had help.
Yeah, that's true. Most of these paleontologists do, though. It's interesting to me that Benton talks about species instead of talking about genera, because we usually talk about genera. And the reason we talk about genera is it's usually difficult to tell whether dinosaurs would be classified in the same genus as another species. So typically, a dinosaur is given its own genus, and there aren't other species in the same genus. There are a few exceptions, actually. There are a lot of exceptions, but most of them have their own genus. So a lot of these diversity things that we talk about how many genera there are. I guess if you're talking about naming, though, you get to name every species, so maybe that's why.
Yes. As Jack Horner said in one of his talks, paleontologists like to name dinosaurs.
Yeah. So if you can split a genus up into 3 species, then you get to name 3 times as many things.
Mm-hmm. Next up, thank you, David, who shared this via Facebook. 9gag posted some pictures of a vertical wall, and according to one commentator, it's Cretaceous Park in Bolivia, that has dinosaur footprints. Apparently, tectonic activity pushed a shoreline vertical. I mean, the pictures are great, but the best part of the comments, here's a couple. One person said, quote, "This is clear scientific proof that dinosaurs could walk on walls." And another person said, quote, "They were bitten by a radioactive spider. It is proven." On April 1st, the Mill Canyon Dinosaur Trackside Trail had its grand opening. The trail has over 200 dinosaur tracks, 8 types of tracks, and 6 types of dinosaurs. And the site was founded in 2009, and researchers have been uncovering and studying the tracks since 2013. They found evidence of herbivorous and carnivorous dinosaurs, including a relative of Utah raptor. And paleontologists were at the opening ceremony to answer questions.
Yeah, I think we talked about that site before and all the different tracks that are there, so it's cool that now the public can go check it out.
Yeah. Wonder if they pulled any pranks April Fool's Day.
Oh, yeah. There's another article on Forbes by Shayna Montanari that we always like to read. This one's titled, "The 4 Coolest Things Paleontologists Have Discovered About Dinosaur Eggs." The first item is that dinosaurs sat on nests just like birds. Specifically, she talks about the nest called Big Mama, which was found in the Gobi Desert by the American Museum of Natural History, and showed an oviraptor called Siddipati covering its nest. She also points to a new study where researchers looked at porosity of eggs and nest structure and determined that Troodon probably sat on its eggs as well. It's definitely a good way to talk to non-dinosaur enthusiasts about how we know they're birds.
Definitely.
Similarities like that.
That reminds me, the other night, Garrett was speaking at an event about dinosaurs, and a woman came up and asked questions afterwards about nests and eggs, and specifically if T-Rex males sat on eggs.
Yeah, I'm not sure where the idea that the males would do it came from. That was pretty interesting.
It was, and it seems like it's a big deal to even know that dinosaurs sat on their eggs at all.
Yep. The second coolest thing in the article is we can sometimes find dinosaur embryos in eggs. And we have found Torvosaurus, a sauropodomorph, and one of those Siddipatis. Also, we've been using CT imaging lately to look at the arrangement of bones before we even open a fossilized egg. And Shayna points to an article that we talked about last year where they determined that an embryo was likely of a bird and not a non-avian dinosaur by looking at the arrangement of the bones and how long different bones were and stuff like that. The third coolest thing is that dinosaur eggs were colorful. And she talks about an article that's actually in preprint in Pure J that we haven't talked about yet, where they're looking for preserved eggshell pigments. And it's a lot like figuring out the color of fossilized feathers that we talked about in the past, where you have to correlate relative chemistry of these fossilized eggs to living bird eggs. Then you kind of guess. It's really hard to prove, but you can get a pretty educated guess about what color it would have been. The fourth coolest thing in the list is that the eggs themselves can preserve information about their environment. And we've talked a little bit about this too, where we can get information by looking at the carbon and oxygen isotopes in the calcium in the shell. And she discusses her own study where she showed that the Gobi Desert was dry 80 million years ago, just like it is right now. And she also points out that they have helped to show what dinosaurs' body temperature was by looking at some of these details too. It helps with the whole dinosaurs aren't cold-blooded in layman's terms. So it's all really interesting. I thought it was kind of funny that she was talking about what color eggs were, and the article was posted pretty close to Easter.
Yeah. Dinosaurs wouldn't have had to do anything to their eggs for their hunts.
Yeah.
Next, in LA, the LA Zoo is opening a new exhibit on April 15th with life-sized animatronic dinosaurs. The exhibit is called Dinosaurs Unextinct at the LA Zoo, and people will be able to see 17 animatronic dinosaurs, some as tall as 22 feet and weighing 6,700 pounds.
Sounds like a real dinosaur.
Yeah, they're trying to make it as real as possible. So some of the dinosaurs that you can see include T-Rex, Carnotaurus, Diabloceratops, and Brachiosaurus, as well as a Stegosaurus, and visitors can actually control Stegosaurus to make it move. They also will have a fossil dig, where you dig up fiberglass bones, and an augmented reality app where you can see dinosaurs move on your phone when you point your phone camera at the animatronic dinosaurs. Admission to this exhibit costs $5 per person, pretty reasonable, and the exhibit will run until October 31st. Now, for those with sweet tooth, the Dala 100% Chocolate Cafe in Busan, South Korea serves a dessert called the Chocolate Dinosaur Egg. Apparently, quote, the shell is made of chocolate, there's chocolate ice cream inside, and it all rests on top of a bed of shaved chocolate ice, end quote. Plus, you can pour on chocolate syrup, just in case you didn't have enough chocolate. The cafe also gives you a hammer to crack open the egg, which is about the size of a T-Rex egg, probably. Oof. It's a very large dessert.
That's a ton of chocolate.
I don't think I could finish it all, but
I couldn't.
I'm sure there's some people who could.
I'd need like 5 friends to get through all that chocolate.
Sounds like it'd be fun to eat, though.
Yeah.
And speaking of fun, Madsoft Games is releasing a game called Me and My Dinosaur to PlayStation 4 and PCs and Macs. It's a 2D puzzle platform game where you play as Hunter and his pet dinosaur Rex. They have 30 levels and lots of puzzles. The trailer I saw is just a teaser with a cartoon dinosaur egg cracking, so leaves you wanting more, I guess. And according to an abbreviated description, quote, follow the thrilling adventures of Hunter and Rex in a family-friendly, heartwarming single-player story campaign. Use dino treats to solve puzzles. Collect, feed, and train 28 adorable baby dinos in the dino daycare. That alone, I think, got me.
That sounds very much like your type of game.
Yep.
A lot like the Jurassic Park builder kind of thing where you're collecting and growing and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, plus puzzles.
Yeah, even better.
So I'm looking forward to that game coming out. Next, just for fun, happened to stumble upon this answer that John Davis, who's a Marine Corps weapons instructor, he answered this question on Quora, could you kill a Tyrannosaurus Rex with a pistol? And he gives a quick 2-step answer. Step 1, once eaten, aim for heart. Step 2, wait and die the victor. He also significantly added more to his answer in response to, I guess, people thinking his original answer was a joke that needed improvement. So he says, quote, the only real thing that people need to accept given a duel with a Tyrannosaurus Rex is that, positive emphasis, you will die. You will die soon. He also adds another alternative. You could kill a baby T-Rex. That one you'd probably survive. And then he shares his answer for another question, could a T-Rex have swallowed a human whole or mostly whole, or would several bites have been involved? And his answer to that is basically you need to be a short person. He mentions Martin Kleba, an actor who is 4'1", and he has warrior instincts, so he could probably punch T-Rex's throat while he's being swallowed and then deliver, quote, the fatal shot from within, end quote. It's a pretty epic Quora post. I'm glad.
It's pretty funny.
Yeah, I like that he put so much thought into it.
Yeah. But for the record, T-Rex wouldn't have swallowed you whole. He would have done that move where he crushes you with his huge teeth and then waited for you to die and then eaten you.
So just follow the first 2 steps. Aim for the heart, wait, and die the victor.
maybe, if it punctures its skin.
Oh, that's true. The Australian Age of Dinosaurs Museum in Queensland, Australia just received 10 life-size bronze cast dinosaurs as part of their Stage 3 development plan, which includes making a new 6,000 square meter building. The dinosaurs were made by a bronze foundry in Texas, but they're all dinosaurs that came from Queensland originally. And this museum is owned by David Elliott and his wife Judy, who opened the museum back in 2009.
Cool.
Yep.
Life-size bronze cast dinosaur sounds awesome. And heavy.
Yes. Must have taken a long time to get from Texas to Queensland, Australia.
Yeah, and expensive.
So next, for fans of the TV show Dinosaurs, I know we're fans, Yahoo recently posted an interview with Leif Tilden, who's the actor who wore the body of Robbie in the show Dinosaurs. Robbie is the teenage boy. Yeah. It actually took 3 people to make Robbie. I think it took 3 people for each of those characters.
Mm-hmm.
Jason Willinger did Robbie's voice, and puppeteer Steve Whitmire took care of the facial expressions. Leif said that he never actually met Jason, but he did work closely with Steve. That's pretty interesting. So for background, Leif wore the Donatello suit built by Jim Henson Studios in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles film and sequel. And he said that that helped him prepare for the role of Robbie because he learned how to move and work with other puppeteers and also to stay hydrated. And he said it took about an hour to put on the Robbie suit.
Oof.
And that shooting days were usually 12 hours long.
Oh, my.
I know. And even though he didn't voice Robbie, he memorized all the lines and he worked with Steve to, quote, be completely in sync and connected emotionally.
Yeah, it plays pretty well. When you watch the show, you're not thinking like there's 3 people controlling this and the face is out of sync.
Mm-hmm.
It looks really good.
It's really smooth, yeah. So when he was asked what was a signature moment while making the show, he said, quote, one day stands out above the rest. When Robbie got to dance with Michael Jackson for an ABC promo, Michael Jackson was one of my heroes. They made a white glove for Robbie, and I learned this whole routine. I remember seeing Michael in his trailer, and he spoke with me and gave me a big hug. That, to me, was the most epic moment.
That's awesome. I love Michael Jackson. Yeah, it must have been hot. I never really thought about it before, but most of the modern dinosaur replica type costumes, your legs are exposed and there's kind of an opening on the bottom of the suit. Mm-hmm. But in the dinosaur show, they were totally enclosed in the thing. Like their legs were enclosed and everything because they had the more upright posture.
Mm-hmm.
So it must have been super hot in there.
Yeah, for 12 hours.
Oh, man. That's rough.
It's important to stay hydrated.
Yeah.
So in other media, this came out on Cinema Blend recently. Quote, a trailer for one of Paul Walker's earlier films has just surfaced, and it involves having his brain transplanted into a robot dinosaur, end quote. The movie is called Tammy and the T-Rex, and the premise is that Paul Walker's character is murdered, and a scientist takes his brain and puts it into a robotic T-Rex. Watching the trailer, I kept thinking, this is a real movie? They actually made it's not just a spoof, a trailer spoof. It's a really campy trailer, as you can imagine, and cheesy. It makes no sense, but at the same time, it looks like it'd be fun to watch.
So is it a real movie then?
It is a real movie.
Wow.
This is back before Paul Walker was famous.
Maybe it'll have a resurgence now.
Could be. I'm intrigued. I don't know how easy it is to find this movie.
Gotta get a VHS player, probably.
Maybe. A quick side note away from movies. In the UK, a 13-meter or 43-foot diplodocus that's made of plants is making its way around London to help educate children on plant-based foods.
It's made of plants?
That is what the article says, yeah.
Is it like the Rose Parade where it's like a bunch of flowers arranged on a float or something?
No, it looks more like a topiary.
Huh. That's cool.
Yeah. So this diplodocus is named Florosaurus, fitting, and it's as long as a double-decker bus and weighs 750 kilograms or 1,650 pounds. It's meant to make kids want to eat more vegetables. Apparently, a recent study found that kids don't eat vegetables because they think they're boring.
That seems like kind of a stretch. But I'm glad that this is the approach they took because they probably spent a lot of money on it.
Yes. I think so. So Florosaurus is at Westfield Stratford until April 4th, and then Florosaurus will move to Trafford Centre, Manchester, so I guess out of London, April 7th to 10th.
Sounds awesome. I wish I had a 13-meter long dinosaur topiary in our yard. That would be awesome.
That would be. Would it make you want to eat more vegetables?
It would have nothing to do with that.
Oh.
That's why I think that's crazy.
There might be more to it than we know.
They're going to stuff a bunch of like cucumbers in it or something and say like, you could eat a dinosaur cucumber.
I don't know. There's probably some exhibit that goes with it.
It could be. That's funny.
So now we have a couple items that have to do with Jurassic World. Pretty exciting. The first one, Mashable Nature recut Jurassic Park 1, 2, and 3 and Jurassic World to make a trailer that reimagines the movie as a nature documentary. It follows the life of Littletail, a raptor, from hatching out of the egg until becoming an adult. And the trailer is only a minute and a half, but it gives the Jurassic World franchise a really family-friendly vibe. It's totally different. I wish it was real.
That's funny.
Yeah.
It's really fun to make those spoof trailers. I've done a couple of those.
Yeah.
Just a little bit of editing and like a background music track can totally change. You can make like a comedy, a horror, or you can make, a super violent movie look like a romantic comedy.
Yeah. Could you turn Tammy and the T-Rex into something Jurassic Park-esque?
I'm sure. You just got to play like startling music and do like a reaction shot as soon as they show the dinosaur.
So we also have some more updates on Jurassic World 2. According to Movie News Guide, filming will take place in London, and there will be more interaction between dinosaurs and people. Quote, according to the plot of the story, the dinosaurs will be roaming free out of the theme parks that may bring the extinct animals nearer to everyone's home, end quote. Also, quote, the gang of dinosaurs may be used as military assets. And,
dun dun dun.
Yeah, I know at least a few people seem upset about this already on the interwebs. And that's it for the news this week. Now on to the dinosaur of the day, Leaellynasaura, which was requested from David via Facebook. So thanks, David. Leaellynasaura means Leaellyn's lizard, and you may notice that the ending is saura and not saurus, like most dinosaur names, and the saura ending is feminine, like in Maiasaura. Apparently, this dinosaur is often accidentally called Leaellynasaurus in the media, and it's a bit of a fight, the paleontologists who named the dinosaur. But anyway, Leaellynasaura was a small herbivorous ornithischian. It was described in 1989 and named after Leaellyn Rich, the daughter of the two paleontologists, Tom Rich and Patricia Vickers-Rich, who found the fossils. And the fossils were found in Dinosaur Cove, Australia. Leaellynasaura lived in the Cretaceous, and the type species is Leaellynsaura amicagraphica. And the name amicagraphica means friend writing, and that's in honor of the Friends of the Museum of Victoria and the National Geographic Society. So Tom and Patricia found two nearly complete skeletons and two fragmentary skulls and some teeth, and the holotype is of a juvenile. Leaellynasaura is a polar dinosaur that lived in the Antarctic Circle. At the time, Victoria, Australia was in the Antarctic Circle. It was much warmer in the Cretaceous than it is today, though there were long days and long nights depending on the time of year. Dinosaur Cove is a fossil bed that was named in 1980, and other dinosaurs found there were specimens of Atlascopcosaurus and an unnamed dinosaur related to Allosaurus. In 2015, the land next to Dinosaur Cove was put up for sale. Greg Denny, an amateur dinosaur fossil hunter, his family has owned the property for decades, but he said someone else needs to take it to the next level and build a museum with a couple $1 million.
Yeah, just a couple $1 million.
Yeah, it would also take a lot of money to maintain it.
That's true.
So it'll be interesting to see if anyone does take it to the next level. Leaellyn was 12 years old when her parents named the dinosaur. In an open letter to Ranger Rick magazine, Leaellyn Rich wrote, quote, when I was 2, I had a book called My Little Dinosaur. It was about a boy who found a live dinosaur in a cave near his house. I started wanting a dinosaur too. My dad worked with dinosaurs in a museum, so I asked him to get me one. You can just imagine how I felt when I first saw the fossils of my very own dinosaur. Thanks, Mom and Dad.
That's great.
Yeah, it's a really great story.
I wish my parents were paleontologists.
So her father at one point said, quote, I never promised her a living one, but she got one, even though she had to wait for it, and she waited 10 years for that dinosaur.
That's true. A living one is probably what she meant.
Yes. Well,
But you take what you can get.
She seemed happy.
Yeah.
So Tom and Patricia, the paleontologists who named the dinosaur, they've been married and partners in science for 50 years, which is amazing. They also discovered another dinosaur, Timimus, named after their son Tim, so very fair.
Good thing they've discovered two. Otherwise, the other one would always be bitter.
Yeah, unless the other one doesn't care about dinosaurs.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. But still nice. Leaellynnasaura was about 6.5 to 10 feet or 2 to 3 meters long and 2 feet or 60 centimeters tall with the hips. It was bipedal and it lived in temperatures between 21 and 50 degrees Fahrenheit. It grew quickly during its first 3 years and then it grew more slowly afterwards. This is based on histological studies of femurs found in 1999 after the initial discovery. It may have grown quickly in its early years to more easily regulate its body temperature, and then once it was large enough, it didn't need to grow during tough times. It probably had skin and hair-like filaments. And Leaellynnasaura had a really long tail, more than 70 vertebrae in its tail, and some scientists think it was 75% of its body length. So it possibly used the tail for display, but it was also a flexible tail that may have been fluffy, and it could have wrapped it around its body for warmth.
Weird.
It has the proportionately longest tail of all known ornithischians. Leaellynnasaura may have burrowed, since 3 fossilized burrows were found in Dinosaur Cove in the late 2000s, and that could have been another way to help it stay warm. And it may have lived for weeks or months, up to 4 months at a time in the dark. However, there was still some light from the aurora, snow reflecting light displays, and the moon, so that's something. It probably didn't hibernate, though we don't know for sure. Scientists used to think that because the growth rings in its bones changed in thickness, that it slowed its metabolism down in the winter to hibernate, but scientists have since found similar growth ring fluctuations in dinosaurs that lived in tropical areas who wouldn't have had to hibernate, so it's unclear whether or not Leaellynnasaura hibernated. Leaellynnasaura had large eyes and large optic lobes, though that may be because the specimen found was a juvenile, so not necessarily large eyes to adapt to low light conditions. It lived among many streams and rivers and forests of conifers and ginkgos, and it ate low-lying plants like ferns and horsetails. They may have also traveled in small herds. Leaellynnasaura is on 5,000 collector coins as part of Perth Mint's Australian Age of Dinosaurs series.
Oh, yeah, we looked at those.
Yeah, and you can see Leaellynnasaura in a dinosaur petting zoo in Australia. It features dinosaur puppets that kids can touch as they learn about dinosaurs. And from July 27th, 2015 until July of 2016 this year, there's an exhibition called Wildlife of Gondwana at the National Wool Museum in Geelong that shows a lot of polar dinosaurs, including Leaellynnasaura, which is an exhibition based on the research of Tom and Patricia. Makes sense.
Cool. Where is the National Wool Museum?
It's in Australia.
Oh, Geelong is in Australia?
Yeah, it's in Victoria, Australia.
It's interesting that a wool museum is showing dinosaurs. Maybe because they're cold and they could have used wool.
I don't know.
Or maybe the museum has nothing to do with wool.
Yeah, I've never been. So Leaellynnasaura has been described as a hypsilophodontid, an iguanodontian, and an ornithischian. It's unclear where in Ornithopoda that it actually belongs. Ornithopods are ornithischians that started small and became larger and populous, especially in the Cretaceous. And Ornithopoda means bird feet. This group had 3-toed feet, the early ones had 4 toes, and beaks. They lived on all 7 continents. They had stiff tails to help balance, and later ornithopods grazed on all 4s and were semi-quadrupedal. They were great at chewing, too, like a modern cow.
And our fun fact for today comes from an idea from Chris via Facebook. And he mentioned that there are a lot of unusual things that you can deduce from fossil evidence, like how teeth can tell you about the diet of an animal. So it turns out that claws can also tell you a lot about a dinosaur. According to an article by Stefan Lautenschlager, published in the Proceedings of the Royal Society, titled Morphological and Functional Diversity in Therizinosaur Claws and the Implications for Theropod Claw Evolution, different therizinosaurs likely used claws for different purposes. The author looked at 3 different uses of a claw, specifically scratch digging, hook and pull, and piercing. All things that you wouldn't want to have happen to you. I guess scratch digging is just for the ground, but hook and pull sounds kind of nasty.
So does piercing.
Yeah. So he then modeled the claws and the stress that would be put on the claw while performing those activities. So, for instance, piercing, you model what it's like if you take the claw and you poke it into something and what kind of stress that causes. The research basically showed that the shorter and wider claws were good for pretty much all three activities. They were pretty universal. But the longer, thinner claws probably couldn't have been used for scratch digging. So they wouldn't have been doing any digging. It would have been more grabbing things or stabbing things. This is just about therizinosaurs, so I'm sure you could apply the same techniques to other dinosaurs and see how the claws would respond to different pressures and forces, and then get a good idea about the behavior of these animals and what their claw shape can tell us. So I think that's one interesting thing that you can find from fossils that you wouldn't think about at first. It's not really obvious.
Yeah, that's true. Cool. And that wraps up this episode of I Know Dino. Thanks for listening. And if you enjoy listening to our podcast and learning more about dinosaurs, then please support us on our Patreon page at patreon.com/iknowdino. Until next time.
Thank you for listening to I Know Dino. If you have any questions or comments about dinosaurs, we'd like to hear from you at plesiosaur@iknowdino.com. And for more information on dinosaurs, go to iknowdino.com or follow us on Google, Facebook, Tumblr, or Twitter at I Know Dino.